Hello, and welcome to my thoughts while standing in the queue. Today, I'm going to talk about why we have so much unemployment. When I was young, the accepted middle class ethic was to always support yourself. It was unthinkable not to train for a vocation. The universal goal for us all was to be able to pay our way in the world. Unemployment was out of the question, not just for the individual, but for the good of society. However, economic analysis tell us that unemployment is actually profitable for business because employers can demand more work for lower wages. In addition, one of the less obvious benefits when unemployment is high is that it actually creates the need for more jobs to remedy the situation. Governments create agencies to deal with the jobless in society. They finance these projects with tax money and create new employment opportunities for people to become the personnel to run these agencies. I worked for one of those agencies in the 60s in Toledo, Ohio, which is my hometown. It was called WEPE, Work Experience for Youth. I had just graduated from Stanford University with a master's degree in journalism, and I couldn't find work at a newspaper in California or New York. And so I returned to Toledo to continue my job hunt. And that was when I discovered WEPE. It was a temporary project funded by the government to try to prepare high school dropouts for the job market. The organization recruited young people by offering them a small fee to come to our classes and be re-educated for employment. At the time, I was very full of myself. After all, I had a degree from a very prestigious university, and I felt I should look like a member of the intellectual elite, because that is what I thought I was. I never left the house without wearing a hat and gloves. I wore long, swirling skirts and top-of-the-line blouses to match. It didn't occur to me that I was in the same predicament as the teenagers I was dealing with because I, too, didn't have a job. But the difference was that I had well-to-do parents to support me while I sought work that pleased me. I could be selective, and I didn't have to take any opportunity that came along. Because they were uneducated, the people I worked with were expected to take jobs that didn't interest them or not work at all. I didn't understand that either. My clients were culled from local high schools. They were the children who left school at 16 and had become part of an ever-growing number of unemployed young men and women hanging out in bars and on street corners. Everyone knew that was unhealthy and non-productive, or so I thought. It never occurred to me that these clients of mine actually enjoyed hanging out with their friends and stealing bits and pieces from local merchants for cigarettes and alcohol. They couldn't sponge off their parents, as I was doing, because their parents could barely feed and clothe their families, another fact that didn't occur to me. Our headquarters were located on Indiana Avenue, the heart of the slums in Toledo. The streets were narrow and filled with the effluvia of discarded trash, broken bicycles, and empty beer bottles. I was living with my parents at the time, and I had no automobile of my own. My parents let me borrow their spare car, their extra car, which was an obscene, ostentatious Cadillac convertible entirely operated with push buttons. I would drive to work in my fancy, expensive-looking outfits with a wide-brimmed Mr. John hat, matching high-heeled shoes and gloves, and park my car next to the Goodwill building where we re-educated our recruits. Cadillacs in the 1960s were huge, gas-eating monstrosities with obscene taillights that added several inches to their length. They filled a parking space and a half at the very least. Indiana Avenue was a very narrow street, almost an alleyway by today's standards, and when I parked my car to go into work, the vehicle filled out the street and blocked traffic both ways. However, because I was in a low-income area of town, most of the residents had never seen such an upscale car. I always drew large crowds of onlookers when I arrived at work, and if there hadn't been a lot of police patrolling the area, I assure you my tires would have been slashed and the hood ripped to shreds within hours after I left the automobile. I was very enthusiastic about this job and very dedicated to helping these youngsters find employment that they enjoyed. After all, I was heartbroken that I couldn't get my job, and I wanted to save them what I thought would be their heartbreak. It was not enough, as far as I was concerned, to earn money. You had to love what you were doing, or you wouldn't do your best work. I was confident that all these people that I would lecture were desperate to better themselves, as I was, and I was positive that it was negative family pressure that forced them to drop out of high school. It never occurred to me that they actually hated school and couldn't wait to get out of the classroom. I'll never forget the first day of that job. I entered the building and I saw about a dozen very sullen teenagers sitting on the steps that led up to the classroom where I would begin my training. "Why don't you go up to the lecture room?" I asked one of the boys. "The door's open." He grinned. "We like to look under the skirts of the fancy ladies who climb the stairs," he said. "I see," I said, and made a mental note to be sure my underwear was mended and that I wore a multi-layered slip under my skirt. I herded all my pupils into the classroom. I stood at the podium and I smiled brightly at them. They were slouched in chairs, dressed in ragged pants and shirts that showed obvious stains of the food they had eaten before coming to the building. There was a definite odor of unwashed bodies and tobacco smoke about them. "Now," I said, "why do we want to work?" I was greeted with absolute silence. I went on to describe the various low-level jobs we had found for them and encourage them to tell me if any of these opportunities appealed to them. More silence. I then talked to them about how important it was to present ourselves as employable, the way we dressed, the smile on our face. More silence. Then a great deal of chatter among all of them. No one was listening to me at all. The day didn't go well, and the first week went from bad to worse. On Friday of that week, I had a conference with my boss, a man named Clarence Day, a really lovely, lovely man. "Mr. Day," I said, "I'm just not fitted for this job. These people don't want to be here. They don't want to work, and I'm wasting their time and yours and mine." He smiled at me and he patted my shoulder. "Not at all, Miss Miller," he said. "You're doing just fine. Of course they don't want to be here. They just want the money we give them to come to the class." Now I was confused. "Didn't you tell them that we were training them to enter the job market? Isn't that why they're here? Didn't they have to apply to be part of this program?" He looked at me with real pity in his eyes. "My dear woman," he said, "we have a quota of people we need to recruit, or we lose our jobs. I just pulled these people off the streets. I don't expect to really get them jobs, and they wouldn't show up for any that we got them anyway." I was dismayed and very disillusioned. I quit the job, of course, and eventually found work at a university teaching the humanities. It wasn't until almost 50 years later that I really understood what was going on in the minds of the people I was trying to convince to go to work. By that time, I was doing comedy, and one of the comedians was talking about his mother trying to convince him to go to school. She pointed to all the people on the beach sunning themselves and listening to music, dancing, laughing, and drinking, he said. And then she said, "You see these lazy people? They're doing nothing. And that's what's going to happen to you if you don't go to school and get a good job." And the comedian continued, "And I thought, I want to be those people." The penny dropped. Why should those youngsters who are having such a good time doing what they enjoy want to give up their freedom to work for someone else when they could get money by just sitting in a classroom while some upper middle class woman spouted a lot of nonsense that meant nothing to them? What no one realized, though, was that as long as having people out of work benefits the economy, will never eliminate unemployment. It's too profitable to give up, and that breaks my heart. And I want to thank you very much for listening to my thought while standing in the queue. I want to remind you that I have a book out. It's called Getting the Last Laugh. It has a picture of me with a dog on the cover. And you can get it on Amazon and find out how I got into this crazy profession. And thank you again for joining me.